Hello my clay friends, this is RB Jules with STO Handmade Craft Spot. Today we're going to talk about wire, and I'm going to bring the tools back out, the wire wrapping tools back out to demonstrate how the tools work and how it works on the different gauges of wire. I'm starting this series because I always knew that you could wire wrap polymer clay, and I said this in another video. And I have been practicing, working with it, and doing several things to prove that you actually could. And if you check out a previous video showing different pieces that I actually made, that I actually wire wrapped with polymer clay and copper wire, you'll see that it can be done. No matter the shape of the clay, it's the heft of the clay, the weight of the clay, the amount of clay that's used in the cabochons that makes it sturdy so that it absolutely doesn't break as you handle and manipulate the wire around the clay, and that the clay can handle the bit of stress and pressure, which is actually not a whole lot because it's dealing more so with the measurement of the clay cabochon to the frame of the wire wrap design, that you're going to be using when you're creating the piece. So to get started, we're going to talk about wire, and I mainly use zebra wire in my pieces. I have tried other clay brands, and I'm sorry, I said clay brands. I got clay on the brain today. Other wire brands, and there are a couple that I like, but I always come back to the zebra wire. So in the videos that I'm going to do, I will be using zebra wire. Feel free to test out and try other wire brands that you feel comfortable with to get started with, to practice with as you go along. It's completely up to you. So first, you have natural copper wire. It's not coated, okay? And some of the wires that you can get it where it's resistant to tarnish resistant, so you can get copper wire like that. This is 100% natural copper wire, and some people, they will do other things to the wire so that it doesn't have a crazy look when you wear the wire, and we'll talk about that later on as we move forward with the wire wrap pieces. And then you have a coated wire, this is the silver coated wire here, and this is a gauge 14. I'm going to talk about the gauges in a minute. And generally, I've never had a problem with this wire tarnishing ever when I wire wrap the piece. You do have to be careful that you don't mar the wire or scratch the coating off, depending on how you're actually manipulating the wire. But for all intents and purposes, when you wire wrap a piece, the coating does not come off of the wire. So the next thing that we're going to discuss are the gauges. And your larger gauge of wire, which in the American measurements of wire is a 32, and that's a really small piece of wire. It almost looks like sewing thread. That's how small the wire is, and you can use it to you can actually use it to wire wrap, but it's pretty small. It'll be very strenuous on your eyes, but you can use it. You can use it to actually create necklaces. You can crochet with it. You can do several things with wire at that size because it's very small, it's very malleable, and it's very, very easy to work with. But it still can kink, it still can get very hard, and it can break. So I know I'm using some terms right now that you may or may not understand, and that's okay because I'm going to tell you what that means later. So the smallest gauge of wire that I have with me is a 26 gauge. And as you can see, it's small, but it's not as small as a 32. The next size under the 32 is a 28, and this is a 26. And when I'm wire wrapping, this is the size that I generally use, which is a 28, which is a 26 gauge of wire. It moves through the wire pretty easy. You can manipulate it and it will do just about whatever it is that you want it to do. And this is the Zebra Wire copper coated silver wire. And I will share other brands later that I have used. So the next size of wire, which this is a natural, this is a 22 gauge wire. You can use this gauge of wire. You can wire wrap with it, but you would definitely need a larger gauge of wire to wire wrap with, and it is a little bit more difficult because the wire gauge is larger. Okay, and that is the trick of it. The larger the wire gauge, the smaller the wire. But the smaller the wire gauge, the larger the piece of the wire. So as we go through each piece of wire, you're going to notice that the piece of wire is getting increasingly larger. And you can use it to create chain links. You can use it to make jump rings. You can use it to make earrings. You can do virtually anything with a piece of 22 gauge wire. Okay, now this here is a 20 gauge wire. As you can see, the wire gauge, this is natural, but as you can see, the gauge is definitely a lot larger than the 22 gauge. And this is generally the size wire that I use when I wire wrap. You see, it's very easy to handle, very easy to bend and straighten. Now, in the beginning, it may not be that easy for you because you don't generally handle or deal with a lot of wire, because one of the greatest tools that you're going to use in addition to the other tools is your fingers. And you're going to have to, it would be good to do like hand exercises and use different practices so you don't get carpal tunnel when you're working with wire and creating pieces, because you use your hands a whole lot. You know, manipulating the tools, pulling the wire, holding the piece the way you want it to be held, so that you can do what it is that you want to do. So this is pretty much the wire gauge that I'm going to be using to teach you how to do wire weaving, and to teach you how to do a few other basic wire wrapping techniques, in addition to some other things like making jump rings and things like that. It's going to be a thicker gauge of wire because you want it to be sturdy and have greater stability, and you want your piece to not fall apart because after you take so much time to create a beautiful piece. So the next gauge of wire is the 18 gauge of wire. Again, as you can see, the wire gauge is definitely a lot larger. Let's do a comparison than the 20 gauge. So you can see that it is completely different. The silver is the 18, the natural is the 20. So looking at them side by side, you can definitely see that the 18 gauge is definitely larger. And with this gauge of wire, you definitely can make jump rings. You can make simple clasps without having to do a full wire wrapped loop, which I'll demonstrate later, to make a clasp. You can wire wrap with this piece. You can actually mix gauges of wire to wire wrap to create different pieces and get different effects and things like that. And we might get into that. I'm not quite sure yet. But you can absolutely do that with 18 gauge. And it's much more sturdier and it's a much stronger gauge of wire. Okay. The next one, I thought I had it over here. Oh, here it is. This is the, oh, that was 18. Okay. I have to show you 16 later. 16 is a larger gauge of wire, larger than the 18. Then you have 14. As you can see, 14 gauge is really, really large, very large. And see, it's not as easy to bend. You have to use a lot of force and strength to be able to manipulate this wire. But you definitely can. The more you practice with the wire and more that you use it, you will be able to manipulate it. It's just that it takes a lot of practice. Just like polymer clay, wire wrapping is one of those medias that you cannot rush. You can do the basic stuff and do your spirals, your curls, and your loop-de-loos and things like that. If that's what you want, you know, keep your pieces simple and beautiful, that's fine. But if you want to do wire weaving, you're definitely going to have to take and learn it in steps and, you know, practice. Practice is the biggest part of it. You have to practice because the first pieces, I don't care who you are, they're generally not master pieces. They are just not. All you can do is love your work and have fun as you go. I'm being as honest as I possibly can because I've been through it myself. And I just kept going and kept going and kept going until my work changed and, you know, into what it looks like today. So this is the larger gauge of wire. Okay. So as promised, one of the main tools we're going to be using in this demonstration is your side cutters. And that's because I'm going to be cutting the pieces of wire. And I'm going to demonstrate only on a few because the effect is going to pretty much be the same. And I'm going to show you how it looks like when you make a loop. How you can hold the wire with the other tools, and how you actually can do a few things and achieve a few things using the other pieces of wire. Okay. So we're going to start with your 22 gauge, which is an easier gauge. As you can see, the smaller the gauge, the larger the gauge, the, you know, bigger the wire. But on a smaller end of the gauges of wire, you can see that like between the 22 up until 18, the wire's very easy to manipulate. You can see that. Okay. So generally, you want to hold the wire so that when you cut the wire, it will not fly all over the place. So this is one of the proper ways to cut it. And you'll just put your side cutters in between, snip your wire. That way it will not launch and fly all over the place and hurt someone. That you don't want to do. Okay. So we're going to take these are the round nose pliers, as I've showed you. As a matter of fact, we're going to cut this again into two so I can do a couple of demonstrations. Okay. So you can hold it at whichever end. I don't have mine scored, and what that means is on different areas of your tool, you can put a dent or a little mark, or put a hash mark in the areas so that you can get an even gauge of loop that you desire when you're using this. But I generally don't, because I've been using the tools for a very long time. So it's pretty easy for me to eyeball and still get an accurate measurement. Okay. So I'm just going to pick this area here. Okay. Make sure your wire is straight. And you can bend it back like this. And y'all, I'm left-handed. Everybody, I'm left-handed. And you can turn your wire this way. And you have it at about a 45-degree angle. Okay. And you bring the wire back over. Just like that. Okay. And you're going to take and you're going to put your wire back at the top. I'm just going to make a little loop. Okay. You're going to take this little piece of wire that's hanging on the side like this, and you're going to fold it back. And you take it out, and there's your loop. That's how you use this piece of wire, this particular gauge. And you can do the same thing with all of them. It's just that the smaller the gauge, the thicker the wire, the more sturdier your loops will become. Okay, and you will be able to use them to create earrings, jump rings, to create earrings, or the beginning of a clasp. You can use it for that. Okay, this particular shape right here. You put a bead on this side, close that in, and you can make a bead component, which I'll show you how to do. It's going to be fun doing that. Okay. So that's the round nose. The next, here's the end cutter that I showed you before. And we're going to use the same little piece of wire. And I'm going to cut this off just so you can see how it works. And you would take and you would put it right in between there. I want you to see this as much as possible. As you can see that it's in there. Okay. And you would just, let's come down a little further. Hold it. You want to hold it so it doesn't fly anywhere, and it snips it right off. See how even the pieces are? Very even. Now if I do the same thing with this wire, with the side cutter, watch what happens. See how it cuts in comparison to this end? I don't know if you can see it that great, but there you go. So that's that for those two. Okay, The next one is going to be your friend, and that's the chain nose pliers. The chain nose pliers, you're going to use it for so many things. You can take it, as I mentioned before, we're going to take and we're going to use the same piece of 22 gauge wire and see how you can bend it. But say you want it bent a lot further. I'm going to try to demonstrate this. And you'll take your 22 gauge wire and it will bend and you can do it at the very end. And the reason why I'm saying that this is a smaller gauge wire, there it is. See that? And you can make a nice little point and then pull it out and say you want to bend it and do something else, you can do just that. And that's one of the things you can do with it. And another thing you can do, it helps you make angles. Okay. And you can make half loops with it. So you can make half loops. But you're mainly, when I'm going to teach you, you're going to be doing pulling. You'll be making some angles with it when you make your jump rings and clasps. But for the most part, you're going to be using it to pull. Okay, that's that. The next one is the flat nose. I'm going to cut one more piece. Still using a 20 gauge. 22 gauge, I'm sorry. And again, with this, you can use it to bend. And it will give you a more precise angle than the chain nose pliers because of the squareness here. Okay. And again, also, let's do this down here because I'm gonna do a couple of things. Say that you want to make a binding, and I'll show you how to do that. You can make all kinds of little loops and things of that nature with the wire. Okay. So let's say that you want to make a swirl or a curly Q. So you could take the edge of your round nose pliers, hold it down, and get a really small circle going. As you can see, a really small circle. And then you can come in with your chain nose pliers and see that you can start to bend it. And what this does, as you make a loop, it gives you a whole lot of control. Now you don't want to apply an extreme amount of pressure, but because this is natural copper wire, it will mark it. So they do have nylon tips that you can add to your tools, or they have like different waxes and things like that you can dip your tools in so that you don't mar it. But I think it's always best to learn how to practice control, and if you just see whether you can't do it that way. See? This is what happens, something cool when you work together with your tools. You can get a nice little swirl loop going on here, and you can do a lot of things with that, and I'll show you in other videos later on what you can do with that. But our focus right now is learning the basic techniques so that you can wire weave. So now the larger the wire gauge, the larger the piece of wire, the harder it is to do that. And you will apply a whole lot more pressure because you're trying to control and manipulate the wire to get it to do what it is that you want to do. So just be aware of that also. Okay. So that's it for all of the tools that we will be using. That's pretty much it. There are other tools that I will introduce of things you can actually do to make some fancy loops and hooks and things of that nature. But we'll talk about that later on in other videos. Next, we're going to actually going to start the basics of the wire weaving process so that you can know how to manipulate two pieces of wire to get them to do exactly what you want them to do, so that you can create a wire woven piece. And each step is going to lead to us being able to do that. And we're going to do the basics. I'm going to show a couple of basic wire weave techniques. Okay. So thank you for coming to take the time to learn some of the gifts that God has blessed me to learn. And they're not my gifts to have, they're gifts to share with you so that you too can learn how to make beautiful jewelry to sell, to wear, whatever it is your heart is desiring. The only thing that I ask is that as you learn the techniques from this channel, that you give the credit, to my channel as well as to me for sharing these techniques with you. As you make your pieces, feel free to sell them, give them as gifts. The choice is yours. And I hope that you enjoy sharing this wire wrapping series with me. Until next time, stay creative.